Okay, so the final faction that will be added in the new patch will be Umbar. So let's take a look at what they have in their unit roster currently, and what I think they'll be good at, what I think they'll be bad at, etc, etc. So I'll line them all up on the grassy plain and we can take a closer look. So we will be going through the Umbar units now, and I have left out the mercenary units and the siege for obvious reasons, because they're really just a cross-faction thing. So we'll be going through them in terms of all their unique stuff. And Umbar, of course, are an offshoot of Harad, so they have all of the Corsair units that Harad used to have. Of course, at the moment they don't have their faction emblem, they just have the Russia one from Medieval 2, but we can ignore that. Corsairs, of course, light infantry, they are the trash of Umbar essentially, and they always have been rather weak. You know, they are more damaging than most very low tier units, but they also tend to die more quickly. So again, it's really picking out who's the shiniest turd when you look at the very low tier units. But Corsairs, you know, everyone needs low tier cannon fodder really, other than maybe the elves and the dwarves. So the Corsairs, and a unit which was added in the last patch, the Corsair Pikemen. I've always been a bit of a fan of low tier pikes because I feel like they can do the job despite being quite cheap. You know, you can get a lot of value for money out of cheaper pikemen, and the Corsair pikemen are very cheap indeed. Harad, well, I say Harad, Umbar, do only have one pike unit, and that is this. As it stands, they might get a higher tier 1 later on, but for the time being, they're mostly focused around spears when it comes to pole arms, which does make them, as the preview build I have at the moment currently stands, does make them a little bit underpowered. And they are also underpowered as it stands for a couple of different reasons I'll get into as we go further down the line here. But I also know that they have 3 new units on the way, so that will probably plug a few of the gaps. The Corsair Pikes, though, again, they're very no-nonsense, just pikes. There's nothing special about them. They will die very easily to archer fire, they're not very well armoured, but they will hold the line against foes that are better than them, provided they're in formation and provided they can't be flanked. A unit which I always thought was pretty good value for money in terms of getting their cost effectiveness out onto the field were the Corsair Savages. Shock infantry as well is going to be very important in the upcoming patch because you're going to need it to really smash through enemy lines. And Corsair Savages, again, the theme of the Corsair units is very low survivability but pretty high damage and cost efficiency provided you use them right. And the Corsair Savages, they're good, they're decent, they're cheap as well, so I would suggest that this is one of the units you're going to see a lot from Umbar as it stands. Moving along, we have the Corsair Warriors. This is basically a sword and shield, a sort of mid-tier infantry unit, I suppose. Not as good as the likes of the Gondor infantry, of course, but it's going to be much better than your standard Corsairs. Very similar to the nomadic warriors from Cannes, formerly of Rune, of course. Again, they don't look particularly special, but they'll give you a solid enough centre to your army. Moving on to a new unit, the Corsair's Dual Swordsmen. They've been added, and essentially they are similar in the sense that they are a mid-tier unit, but they will of course do a lot more damage. Well, what separates them from the Savages is the Savages much more focused on armour, getting to enemy lines. These guys are all about the damage they can inflict, particularly against lower tier units, I must say. The Corsair's Dual Swordsmen will be very good at dealing with enemy militia and the like. Of course, if they get put under archer fire, they're going to drop pretty quickly. And against heavily armoured elite infantry, they will also be stopped dead. So again, a pretty niche unit, but they can mop up enemy trash mobs very, very quickly. Then we have the Castamir's Chosen, of course. The Castamir's Chosen, I must say, have probably been nerfed, because in previous versions of the build, this was one of the strongest infantry units you could field in the mod. Now though, they don't have hit points. They still have high attack and defense, kind of, nowhere near the same as the dwarves, but considering Umbar is meant to be an infantry faction, I'm puzzled about why these guys have been nerfed so seemingly heavily. I might be mistaken because I haven't actually tried these guys out on the field, but I must say, having no hit points, having lower stats and stuff that they should really be in the same tier as, and this really is one of the problems I can see with Umbar at the moment. They don't seem to be good at anything. Arguably skirmishers, but even when it comes to skirmishers, they only really have one standout unit. So they really don't have anything they're good at as it stands, and it should really be foot-based units. So sort of your heavy infantry and your foot archers and javelins, that should be what Umbar are good at. So they're relatively slow and not particularly mobile, but in battle, as it goes along, they should be very, very good. And they're pretty good at holding the line as well. That's what they should be anyway. The Castamirs chosen, however, I think need a bit more of an increase in how good they are. Maybe the 3 new units that are coming will make the Castamirs chosen kind of just a sort of mid to high tier unit, and they're getting something that's like super good heavy infantry. But we'll see. And another unit that isn't quite as good as they once were are the Abrazanin Naduza Guard. Now this again used to be not one of the top 5 shock infantries, but reasonably good. They could still go toe to toe with quite a lot. This is certainly not the case anymore with the likes of the Sons of Argonath, the Winged Swordsmen, the Arthurdane Swords, Dale Paladins. So much is now a lot better than them. They do not have hit points either. Their attack score is pretty high, their defense score is reasonably high for a shock infantry as well, but again they just cannot compete with some of the other units, and they need to be able to compete because this is what Umbar are meant to be good at. So again, hopefully they will get their potency back, hopefully. This is a new unit, the Abrazanin Nadutrarik. I don't know, I don't know how to pronounce that little A with the thing on top of it, but again, essentially these guys are high defense but low attack, and they also will not rout. So they are basically a similar thing to the Sylvan Staff Masters and the Barrow Wights, only again, the stats on these guys would make it seem as though they're not going to be quite as good at that job, but they do at least have an attack score which isn't complete garbage. But even so, I'm basing this on stats, but that's what their intended purpose is to be, essentially, to just survive and not really kill things. Again, I would suggest that probably the Sylvan Staff Masters and the Barrow Wights are both going to be much better at this as it stands. But it's an interesting type of unit, and again, like with the Staff Masters and the Barrow Wights, I'm going to need to see them in action in real terms before I can really pass a judgment on whether this kind of unit is useful or not. In a defensive siege, certainly, but in other situations I'm somewhat sceptical. Delegate Footmen, they were in the previous patch, a spear unit. Pretty good spear unit as well. When the spears are made as powerful as they should be, I can guarantee that these guys will be one of the best mid-tier spears there are. Don't know if they'll be quite as good as the Gondor spears, but they will be decent nonetheless. They don't have hit points, but they will hold the line very, very well. This is a unit which, as it stands, is going to be one of Umbar's most important, I feel. Then we have one of the infantry units that is very good still, the Naru and Aru Royal Guard. This again is a spear unit, so again they're not quite as strong as maybe they should be, but they will be buffed in the upcoming, well, by the time of release they will be buffed to the point they need to be. Very strong spear unit this. Again, thinking along the lines of the Tirith Air Wardens or the Citadel Guard, that sort of thing is what they're going to be going toe to toe with. I'm not sure if they'll be on the level of the Shielded Fountain Guard. I'm going to assume not, because they're a very high tier unit. Still though, very cool looking unit. I do like them, and they will probably be more of a general's bodyguard unit. In a defensive siege, I can see them being very useful as your last line of defense. Moving on to another new unit, and the only new unit from, well, the only infantry unit that in terms of damage is really up to, well, damage and survivability together. The only unit that's really up to snuff as it stands. Corsair's Fencers. They have dual rapiers, they have 2 hit points, they have high attack, decent defense. Basically a very good all-round unit. I would say that the lack of a shield means they're probably going to be targeted by archers quite a lot. But very, very high damage. I imagine them to have the same sort of role as the Hashari had, because of course the Hashari are still Harad units, and Umbar still need a unit of that kind. So this is the unit that they have. I would like to see these guys in action, to be honest, more. I've tried them out and they are good, but I'd like to try them out in more depth, because as it stands I would say they're probably Umbar's most important unit, because they represent the high tier infantry unit that is not underpowered next to its peers. So there's the Corsair's Fencers. Now moving on to the Archers, and Umbar do have a lot of skirmishes. Starting with the Corsair Archers, they can hide, but of course their damage is low compared to others. They will also lose a lot of skirmish fights, so they don't have a lot of armour. Low tier archers, you really know what to expect from them. They won't win you any skirmish fights, but they can potentially whittle down enemy infantry. to the point where they're worth it. More in sieges, I would say. In open field battles, they're just too easy to single out and charge and just win skirmish fights against, as it stands. Then we have the Blackguard archers, again, slightly higher tier archer. Good defense on these guys. I like bucklers, again, a more mid-tier archer. Speaking of mid-tier archers, we also have the Abrazanin Nardubawib. It's a weird sounding name, but again, slightly higher tier again. All of the missile damage of these guys, not particularly high, but the defense ability means you can try and win a skirmish battle with them. Then you have the Rangers. Now, Castamir's Rangers, they have very high missile damage, so most Ranger units will have this. It's similar to the, well, the Athelian Rangers, the basic Athelian Rangers anyway, and the Dunedain Rangers, and what are they called? The Dol Amroth Rangers. I've completely blanked on what they're actually called. I'll remember as soon as the video is over, but this is the sort of thing that the Castamir's Rangers are. Very high damage, but their survivability leaves a little bit to be desired. Corsairs, well, crossbow Corsairs, and they have what look like barbed tips on their crossbows, which is cool. Giving Umbar a crossbow unit is a good move, I feel, because crossbows can be very, very potent, and considering that Umbar are a foot-based faction, or at least that's the idea behind them, this is going to be a very important tool, particularly if you want to deal with marauding cavalry or heavily armoured infantry to tip the fight in your favour. Good to use in sieges as well, whether on the attack or defence. Really the problem that these guys will suffer compared to certain other crossbows is the fact that they don't really have all that much defence. Their armour is not great, so they will of course be subject to a lot of archer fire, and that will probably be suitable to kill them. Moving on to the Corsair Blackguards, again this is a javelin unit. Not a lot of ammunition, but they are very, very damaging indeed, and once their javelins are expended, they're not half bad in melee. I like this unit, I liked it in the previous patch. It's going to be very important that you use your javelins well, particularly these guys because they don't have a lot of ammunition. You're going to need to use them on the right units. You can't just throw them at militia and think that it's job done. You need to save them for a good unit, and then use them to reinforce your front line so it doesn't falter. The really exceptional arch unit they have are the Naru and Aru Royal Archers, of course. Still very, very strong hit points, very strong armour, very good missile damage, that sort of thing. Possibly where your general is going to be at as well, because they are very expensive, but they're survivable enough. Like, they're pretty good in melee, honestly, as well, but, you know, I like this unit, is the takeaway from this. And finally, the only cavalry unit that Umbar have at the moment, but one of the best looking cavalry units, is the Warlords of Umbar. Very strong cav unit as well. A type that is still durable, so they have hit points, very strong charge, very strong defense, all that good stuff. Umbar, I do think, are missing a few things though, and the fact that 3 new units are on the way for them does show that as well. I think that what they need is some high tier infantry that is like very high tier, so that they can really make the infantry fight their own, because it's clear that that's what the focus of Umbar is meant to be, but they don't have the quality to really stamp that authority down. Like even the likes of Arnor, who have more of a they have a very all-round focus, I would say have got better infantry than Harap. Like the Dunedain Knights, the Arthedain Swordsmen, the battle-ready Dunedain, the Dunedain Wardens, and the Pike unit, which I've forgotten the name of already. All of these units mean that the quality of Arnor is going to see them through against Umbar. And also, to add to that, they have got certainly better cavalry and arguably better archers. At least they have more high quality archers. So I think that certainly a couple of infantry units, one that's sort of maybe mid-tier, sort of a mid-tier, well maybe just 2 high-tier units honestly. Maybe a high-tier, another high-tier archer, another very high-tier infantry, sort of like one of the, thinking around along the sort of lines of it being one of the best heavy infantry units in the game. The Abrazanin Naduzagar need to be buffed a little bit as well, so that they're one of the better shock infantry again, so that they can stamp that authority down. And maybe a low tier cav unit, because as it stands, if you just have one of these guys, it's going to get singled out so easily it's not even funny. So I think that maybe a lower tier cav unit of like sort of just basic Corsairs, like maybe Corsair Marauders or something like that, just so that you have some sort of cushion for your inevitable general unit if you want to go for some cav as Umbar. But the focus of Umbar is not meant to be cav, it's meant to be your foot units. So yeah, I would suggest they definitely need an infantry buff if they're going to be competitive, but that will come. I'm pretty sure that is going to come, as well as like the new units, obviously. So that is Umbar, certainly a very stylish faction, and hopefully they will be a potent force to be reckoned with when the patch comes out. But that is everything for the time being. As soon as new units come out, I will of course relay them in the similar fashion that I did the new units video before. And apart from that, it's just really a case of waiting for the patch to come out, and so everyone can enjoy it. And then hopefully I'll be able to get some big battle replays going on with the new patch, with all the new units, and with some of the scenarios as well. That is the plan, but of course, still in the developmental phase, to be sure. But I hope you'll join me for the next video. Hopefully some new units will come out and I can showcase them.